He wasn't asking for a final meal, or a priest, or a phone call. The man everyone feared, the one who built an empire on silence and blood, only wanted to see the woman who once cleaned his floors. The guards thought it was a joke until they saw his eyes. There was no arrogance left in them, only something that looked like peace. That single request spread through the prison like wildfire, but no one could explain it. Why her? Why now? And when she finally walked through those gates, the truth that followed would shake everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and redemption. Before we continue this story of power, loss, and the kind of love that defies logic, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you're still here with me, type "I'm still here" in the comments below. Because what happened next changed everything. The city of Miami wakes under the faint haze of salt air and ambition. It's a place where people pretend that the sun hides all sins. But for some, every new dawn only sharpens the memory of what can't be undone. Dominic Vance knew that better than most. To the world, he was the man who ruled half the city's underground with the elegance of a businessman and the precision of a soldier. But beneath the pressed suits and polished shoes, there was a man running out of places to hide from himself. His name carried both fear and respect, his smile could start a deal or end a life. Yet, for all the wealth and power he commanded, there was something in him that never rested. The nights stretched longer lately. The silence after each meeting became heavier. And for a man who could buy anything, the one thing he couldn't afford anymore was peace. He sat in his office one evening as the sun melted into the horizon, lighting the walls of glass in amber tones. Around him, his men spoke in low voices about shipments, codes, alliances. He nodded, signed, approved, but his mind was elsewhere. When the room emptied, he poured himself a glass of whiskey he wouldn't drink and stared at the city below. He remembered his father's words from years ago: "If you want loyalty, buy a dog. If you want love, forget it. Men like us don't get that luxury." Dominic had laughed back then, a younger version of himself full of arrogance and hunger. But now, that laughter felt like a stranger's echo. He'd seen what love had done to others, made them hesitate, made them weak. And hesitation in his world was a death sentence. Still, there were nights he would look around the empty mansion and wonder what it was all for. He had built an empire out of fear, but no one looked at him with affection, not even himself. Across town, in a small, weathered apartment that smelled faintly of medicine and laundry detergent, Imani Cole carefully folded a stack of uniforms. She was methodical, quiet, her movements shaped by years of discipline. On the bed beside her lay her mother, frail but smiling. "You're working too much again, Imani," her mother whispered. "You can't save the world." Imani smiled faintly and tucked in the blanket around her. "I'm not trying to save the world, Mama. Just trying to keep ours from falling apart." The words carried the weight of 1,000 small sacrifices. Once upon a time, she had been one of the youngest detectives to make rank in Miami PD, sharp, fearless, uncompromising. But betrayal changes people in ways no bullet ever could. The man who destroyed her career wasn't an enemy, he was someone she had loved. A fellow officer who whispered promises at midnight and secrets by morning. He sold a confidential file to a crime family in exchange for money and vanished, leaving her name tied to the leak. The department turned its back. The press shredded what was left. And in a city that moved fast and forgot faster, she was left standing still, reputation in ruins, dreams turned to ash. The only thing she didn't lose was her will to start again. When her savings dried up, she took a job most people with her record wouldn't consider: housekeeping. Cleaning the kind of homes she once raided. Her current assignment was the Vance estate, a sprawling fortress of marble and quiet wealth on the edge of Biscayne Bay. Every time she walked through its glass corridors, she wondered what kind of man needed that much space. She had never met him in person, only heard his voice once through an intercom, deep and controlled. The other staff whispered about him constantly. Some said he was dangerous, others said he was generous. But Imani didn't care. She wasn't there for gossip. She was there for the paycheck that paid for her mother's medication and the hope that someday, somehow, she might clear her name. In Dominic's world, loyalty was currency. But lately, even that was running short. His inner circle was thinning. Some men had vanished quietly after deals went wrong. Others betrayed him for lesser kings. The empire stood, but cracks had begun to show. His right-hand man, Marco, noticed it first. "You've been slipping, boss," he said one night, pouring 2 drinks. "You used to trust no one. Now you let the wrong people get too close." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "You mean people like you?" Marco smirked, but there was a sting beneath it. "I mean women. They always cost us the most." Dominic didn't answer. He just turned away, his gaze on the night outside. The truth was, he had been thinking about a woman. Not in the way he thought of all the others who came and went like smoke. This one didn't flirt, didn't linger, didn't even look at him twice. He had seen her once by chance, a maid crossing the courtyard, earbuds in, humming softly. The way she moved was different. Unafraid, unbothered, almost unaware of the empire surrounding her. There was something unsettling about that kind of calm. For a man used to controlling every reaction, her indifference was almost intoxicating. Back in her apartment, Imani sat by the window, staring at the streetlights flickering outside. She thought of her younger self, the woman who once believed in justice, in promises, in forever. Now, she believed in shifts and paychecks. But sometimes, late at night, her detective instincts would surface without warning. She'd read people on the bus, noticed details others ignored, a scuffed shoe, a lie told through a smile. Her mind never stopped working, it just had nowhere to go. And in quiet moments, she wondered what it would take to feel alive again, to trust someone again. The next morning, their worlds moved closer without either of them realizing it. Dominic's convoy rolled past the old apartment block where she lived. His driver slowed at a red light, and Dominic, lost in thought, glanced out the tinted window. On the sidewalk, Imani was waiting for the bus, her uniform neatly pressed, eyes tired but focused. He didn't know her name. She didn't see him. But something in that single passing moment, the stillness of her posture, the quiet dignity, stayed with him long after the car moved on. At the mansion, the staff moved with clockwork precision. Imani arrived early, as she always did, checking each room silently before anyone noticed her presence. The head housekeeper, a woman named Rosa, approached with a clipboard. "The boss is coming back tonight," she said. "Make sure the study and master suite are spotless. He's particular." Imani nodded, her face unreadable. Understood. She had no interest in who he was outside those walls. Men with power liked to test limits. She had seen enough of that in her years on the force. Her plan was simple, keep her head down, finish her hours, and stay invisible. But invisibility was impossible in Dominic's world. That evening, he returned from a meeting that left blood on his conscience. He stepped into the mansion, and for once, the silence wasn't comforting. He loosened his tie, poured a drink, and walked toward the study. Inside, Imani was wiping down his desk, unaware he'd entered. When she turned and saw him, she froze for a second, not out of fear, but surprise. He looked younger than she expected, not the grizzled kingpin from gossip. His voice broke the silence. "You must be the new one," he said. "They told me you work fast." She nodded. "I do what I'm paid to do, sir." He smiled faintly. "I like that answer." It was a brief exchange, meaningless on the surface, but something shifted in that moment, like 2 wires brushing together for the first time. When she left the room, Dominic found himself watching the door long after it closed. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the tone of her voice, steady, grounded, without flattery. He had built his life around manipulation, but she didn't seem to play the game. The next day, he asked Rosa casually, "What's her name, the new one?" Rosa hesitated. "Imani. Quiet girl. Keeps to herself. Hard worker." Dominic just nodded, pretending disinterest, but the name stuck with him. That night, he caught himself thinking about it while reviewing financial ledgers. Imani. It sounded unfamiliar, like a word from a language he used to know but had forgotten. Weeks passed, and their routines continued. Dominic moved through meetings, threats, and negotiations. Imani moved through chores, errands, and medical bills. Yet both carried invisible burdens, his, built on guilt, hers, built on regret. They were strangers linked by the same fatigue that comes from living too long in survival mode. One evening, while cleaning the hall outside his office, she overheard raised voices. Dominic and Marco arguing. "You can't keep doing this," Marco said. "Every time we win a fight, you go soft. You give money away. You're slipping." Dominic's voice was low but sharp. "It's not softness. It's strategy. It's weakness," Marco snapped. "And weakness gets men killed." Silence followed. Then Dominic said, quietly, "Then maybe I'm tired of being the kind of man who kills first." The words stunned her. For a second, she saw the human side of the monster people whispered about. She stepped back, careful not to be seen, and continued her work, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. But those words stayed with her long after she left the mansion. That night, Dominic sat by his window, the ocean stretching endlessly before him. The mansion was silent, yet he could hear faint music from the staff quarters. He imagined her there, humming that same tune she always did when she worked. He realized he had started waiting for that sound each morning without meaning to. It had become his proof that something real still existed within the walls he built. Meanwhile, Imani lay awake in her small apartment, her mother asleep beside her. She thought about the man she cleaned for, the one who spoke with calm authority but carried something broken behind his eyes. She told herself it wasn't her business. But a part of her, the part that still thought like a detective, couldn't stop analyzing him. The small gestures. The way he avoided mirrors. The way he gave orders with precision but hesitated when someone thanked him. What kind of man is he really, she whispered to herself. She didn't know that he was asking the same question about her. Their worlds were colliding quietly, without permission. Each carried the other in thought, though neither would admit it. It wasn't attraction yet, it was recognition. Two lives built on silence had begun to echo each other. In Dominic's next meeting, a rival hinted at betrayal within his ranks. He brushed it off, but unease gnawed at him. Later, when he returned home, he found Imani polishing the marble floors outside his office. She looked up briefly and said, "Rough day?" He was caught off guard. No one spoke to him that way, not his men, not his lovers, not his so-called friends. "Something like that," he said. She gave a small nod. Sometimes silence fixes more than talking ever could. Then she turned back to her work. For a moment, he stood there, unsure whether to laugh or think. He chose to think. By the time he walked away, something inside him had shifted again. He didn't know what it was yet, but the calm in her words felt like the first honest thing he'd heard in years. And somewhere deep down, he began to understand that power wasn't everything, it never had been. What mattered was the one person who could see through it and still stand unshaken. As the night settled over Miami, two souls lay awake under the same sky, one surrounded by guards and gold, the other by bills and broken memories. Neither knew that the choices they made in the coming days would intertwine their fates forever. For now, there was only the quiet before the storm of revelation, the moment before love walks in wearing the face of destiny. It started on a humid Friday morning, the kind of Miami day where the heat clings to your skin and time itself feels heavy. Dominic Vance woke before the rest of the house, unable to shake the restlessness that had haunted him all week. He had a deal that went wrong the night before, an ambush at the port that cost him 3 men and his temper. He'd handled the retaliation before sunrise, but the mess still sat inside him like unfinished business. As he dressed, he noticed a streak of dried blood on his cuff, a reminder that power always left stains, visible or not. Downstairs, the house was already stirring, footsteps, muted voices, the rhythm of staff trying not to disturb the boss. He liked the control that came with silence, but lately the silence had started to sound too much like loneliness. Imani Cole arrived through the service entrance with a folded list in her hand and exhaustion in her eyes. She had worked a double shift the night before at another estate to cover her mother's hospital bill. Her body wanted rest, her mind wouldn't allow it. As she changed into her uniform, the head housekeeper reminded everyone that the boss was home early and that everything needed to shine. Imani nodded without a word. She didn't fear men like him anymore. She'd spent years surrounded by them, officers, suspects, liars who smiled before they destroyed you. She wasn't here to impress, she was here to survive. Dominic stepped into the corridor just as Imani came around the corner carrying a silver tray of glass tumblers. The collision was literal at first, the tray wobbled, a single glass fell, shattered on the marble floor. Both froze. For a heartbeat the mansion held its breath. Dominic looked at her, expecting the usual panic or apology. Instead, she met his gaze squarely and said, "Sorry about that. I'll clean it up." Her tone was calm, not submissive, not rude, just steady. That balance caught him off guard. "Most people stutter when they bump into me," he said quietly. She bent to pick up the pieces. "Most people don't scare easy when they're tired enough." He almost smiled but didn't. Throughout the day he found himself noticing her more than he meant to. At lunch, she passed through the dining hall, collecting plates while two of his men discussed business that should have been behind closed doors. When one of them made a careless joke at her expense, Dominic's glance was enough to silence him. Later, she saw him in the courtyard with a group of associates. He looked different there, commanding but distracted, his voice smooth yet hollow. She wondered what kind of man looked that controlled yet that weary at the same time. She told herself it wasn't her concern. In the afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in fast. Power flickered once, and the estate generator kicked in. Imani was alone in the study, dusting shelves lined with old books and photographs. One frame drew her attention, a faded picture of a younger Dominic with a woman and a dog. She studied his face in that photo, softer, unguarded. "You shouldn't touch that," came his voice from the doorway. She turned, startled but not embarrassed. "I wasn't touching it," she said. "Just wondering who you were before all this." His expression tightened for a moment, then eased into something almost curious. "And what do you think you know about me?" She set the frame back. "Nothing. That's the point." He leaned against the doorframe. "People usually pretend they do." "I'm not people," she said. The silence that followed felt strange, not hostile, not friendly, just aware. By evening, the rain intensified, and most of the staff had left early to beat the storm. Imani stayed. Rosa had begged her to finish the inventory in the wine cellar. Dominic's men were gone, too, leaving the house unusually quiet. When Imani came upstairs with the last report, she hesitated outside his office. Through the cracked door she saw him sitting alone, sleeves rolled up, a half-empty glass beside a stack of papers. He looked up. "You can come in," he said without raising his voice. She stepped in, keeping her distance. "Rosa asked me to leave this on your desk." He nodded but didn't take it. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit for a second. It's pouring outside." "No rush." She hesitated. "I don't usually sit where I work." "You can make an exception," he replied. Something in his tone, firm but not forceful, made her obey. They sat in silence for nearly a minute before he spoke again. "You used to be a cop." It wasn't a question. She froze slightly. "Who told you that?" "Rosa mentioned it. Said you were the best until something happened." She looked down at her hands. "Something always happens." He studied her. "Why stay here, cleaning up after people like me?" She met his eyes. "Because bills don't care who you work for." He exhaled slowly. "Fair answer." Then softer, "You think I'm the villain, don't you?" she replied without pause. I don't think about you at all, sir. That honesty stung more than insult would have. The lightning outside cast brief flashes across the room. Dominic poured another drink and offered her one. She shook her head. I don't drink with my boss. Smart, he said. Most people would. I'm not most people. Yeah, he murmured. I'm starting to see that. He leaned back, watching her, then asked, You always this serious? Only when I'm awake, she said dryly. For the first time, he laughed, a real, short laugh that surprised them both. It filled the room like an accidental confession. When she stood to leave, he said quietly, You ever get tired of starting over? She paused at the door. Every day. But stopping never fixed anything either. Their eyes met once more, longer this time. Then she left without waiting for dismissal. That night, neither of them slept easily. Dominic paced the edge of his balcony, thinking about her voice, the way she didn't try to please him. Most people wanted something from him, money, safety, access. She wanted nothing. That kind of indifference was magnetic. Meanwhile, across the city, Imani lay awake replaying his question in her mind. You ever get tired of starting over? She'd never told anyone how much that question haunted her. Maybe he asked because he knew the feeling himself. The next morning, the air was clearer after the storm. Dominic found himself downstairs earlier than usual, walking into the kitchen under the pretense of coffee. She was there, tying her apron. He said, morning, as casually as he could. She looked up, a little surprised. Morning. You always this early? Someone has to make sure this place doesn't collapse before noon. He smiled faintly. If it ever does, I'll blame you. Go ahead, she said, grabbing a mop. I'm used to taking the blame. The words came out sharper than she intended, and for a second, they both felt the tension behind them. He said quietly, maybe some of us are tired of giving it. She didn't answer, but the silence between them said enough. As the day unfolded, subtle shifts began to ripple through their routine. Dominic found excuses to cross her path. She caught him lingering near hallways he rarely used. Once, while arranging fresh flowers in the foyer, she noticed him watching from the stairs. If you're going to stare, you might as well help, she said without looking up. I don't take orders, he replied. That's the problem, she said softly. He didn't know whether to be offended or impressed. Later that afternoon, Marco arrived unannounced, dragging the usual scent of gunpowder and urgency. We need to talk, he said in front of Imani, clearly testing boundaries. Dominic glanced at her, then back at Marco. We'll talk in the office. When the door closed, Marco's tone hardened. You're distracted. Everyone sees it. That woman, she's bad for business. Dominic's voice was even. She's an employee. She's a liability, Marco pressed. The rival crews think you've gone soft. They smell blood. Dominic's patience thinned. Let them smell what they want. I handle my affairs, not rumors. Marco leaned in. You start protecting someone like her, you make her a target. Dominic's eyes flicked upward. Then maybe they should worry about what happens if they touch her. The warning in his voice made even Marco step back. Imani didn't hear the words, but she felt the tension when Marco stormed out later. She was sweeping near the entrance when Dominic approached. You'll probably hear some nonsense from my men, he said. Ignore it. She looked at him steadily. I don't listen to gossip. Never have. He nodded. Good. Then after a pause, you should be careful, though. She frowned. About what? The world I live in has sharp edges. She met his gaze without flinching. So does mine. He wanted to tell her more, to warn her that just being seen with him could put her in danger. But before he could speak, Rosa entered with a message about a call waiting. The moment broke. That evening, the mansion was quieter than usual. Dominic found himself in the courtyard where she was watering plants under the fading light. He said, "You work too hard." She didn't look up. "You pay too much attention." He walked closer. "Maybe I just notice what others miss." She stopped, turned to him. "Then you should notice I'm not interested in conversation." "Fair," he said, yet he didn't leave. "But tell me something, Imani. What made you stop trusting people?" Her expression flickered, a shadow of memory passing over her face. "Trust gets expensive," she said. "I couldn't afford it anymore." He nodded slowly. "I know the feeling." They stood there in silence, two people from different worlds, bound by the same invisible fatigue. Then the distant sound of gunfire shattered the quiet, quick, muffled, close enough to feel. Instinct took over. Dominic pulled her behind a pillar, eyes scanning the perimeter. One of his guards ran in, shouting, "Shots from the north gate." "It's handled." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Find out who sent them." The guard ran off. Imani's pulse was still racing. "Is this normal?" she asked, her voice low. "For me, yes," he said. "For you, I hope not." She pulled away slightly. "I don't belong in this kind of world." "Maybe," he said softly, "but the world doesn't ask who belongs. It just decides who survives." When the noise faded and the courtyard stilled again, she stepped back, her eyes meeting his. "Whatever you're into, keep me out of it." "I'm trying," he said honestly. "But you keep walking into it." She shook her head, turning to leave. "Then I guess that's where the problem starts." He watched her go, realizing that for the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without fear. It was disarming. It was dangerous. And it was the beginning of something he could no longer control. That night, rain returned, softer this time. Dominic stood by the window of his study, replaying her words. Down the hall, he heard faint footsteps and wondered if she was still working or if his mind was playing tricks. In another part of the mansion, Imani sat in the staff quarters, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror. She told herself to stay distant, to keep her guard up. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the calm behind the power, the loneliness he tried so hard to hide. She whispered to herself, "Don't make this complicated," but her heartbeat already had. In the darkness, two people lay awake on opposite sides of the same house, both wondering the same thing without daring to say it: what happens next? That question hung in the air like static, unspoken but alive, marking the exact moment when danger and desire finally collided. And by morning, nothing between them would ever feel ordinary again. The days that followed felt like a quiet tug-of-war neither of them admitted was happening. Dominic Vance, the man who could command fear with a glance, found himself lingering in places he'd once walked through without noticing. The rhythm of his empire, meetings, shipments, deals, kept moving, but his focus had shifted. He started testing the edges of what Imani Cole would allow. It began with small gestures. A sleek black car waited outside one evening as she left work. The driver rolled down the window and said, "Mr. Vance insists you shouldn't take the bus at this hour." She looked at the car, then at the man. "Tell Mr. Vance I insist on keeping my routine." She walked away before the driver could answer. When Dominic heard how she refused, he didn't get angry. He smiled faintly and said, "Good. At least one person around here still tells me no." The next morning, he crossed her path intentionally in the courtyard. "You turned down the ride," he said. She kept walking. It was unnecessary. Unnecessary or unwanted? Both. Her voice didn't carry defiance, just clarity. He stepped beside her. "You really don't like favors, do you?" "I don't like debts," she replied. "They come with interest." He chuckled quietly. "You talk like someone who's been burned." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "Everyone has. Some of us just stopped pretending it didn't hurt." The comment struck deeper than she intended. Dominic watched her go, realizing that every boundary she drew made him want to cross another. That night, the first tremor of danger appeared. Two of Victor Cruz's men followed Imani as she left the property. They wanted to remind Dominic that his rivals were watching, that nothing he cared for was out of reach. He never told her, but by midnight those two men were found unconscious near the pier, bruised, breathing, and scared enough never to speak again. Dominic ordered his men to keep their mouths shut. She didn't need to know he'd quietly started protecting her. All she noticed was that the next morning her car tire, which had been slashed days before, was suddenly new. When she asked Rosa who fixed it, no one had an answer. She didn't believe in coincidences, but she also didn't believe in gratitude for things she hadn't requested. Still, the unspoken tension grew. Dominic began showing up in rooms where she worked, offering casual conversation, asking about her mother, about her old career. "You miss being a detective?" he asked one afternoon as she polished the grand piano. "Sometimes," she admitted. "It's strange missing something that nearly destroyed you." "Maybe that's how you know it mattered," he said. She shook her head. "Or maybe that's how you know it was poison." The room fell silent. He respected her distance but couldn't stop pressing against it. Every refusal from her felt like a challenge he couldn't win with money or intimidation, and that unfamiliar helplessness fascinated him. Meanwhile, within his organization, cracks widened. Marco and the other lieutenants whispered about distraction. One evening, in the dim light of the cigar room, Marco said, "You're letting this woman crawl under your skin, Dom. You used to be colder than the ocean out there. Now you're soft." Dominic's response was even. "Maybe I'm finally human." Marco leaned forward. "Being human gets men like us killed." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe I deserve the risk." Marco didn't argue further, but his silence carried warning. Word spread quickly, people around Dominic sensed the shift. Some respected it, others waited to exploit it. For Imani, the changes were quieter but no less real. She found herself thinking about him on her commute, about the way he listened when most men only heard themselves. She hated that it made her pulse quicken. One night, while helping Rosa inventory supplies, she overheard the guards joking about Dominic's new weakness. She said nothing, but inside something twisted, a mixture of anger and confusion. Why did she care how they talked about him? Why did it matter that they saw him as less powerful? She reminded herself of who he was, of what he'd done. But the memory of his tired eyes and gentle tone refused to fade. A few evenings later, a storm hit Miami again. The staff left early, but she stayed behind to secure windows in the east wing. Lightning cracked, power flickered, and Dominic appeared in the hallway holding a flashlight. "You shouldn't still be here," he said. "Neither should you," she replied, half smiling. "You pay people for this." "I trust myself more than I trust them," he said. She tightened a latch, hair damp from rain sneaking through the open glass. He watched her quietly, the beam of light catching the droplets on her skin. "You always have to be the one fixing things, huh?" he asked. "Someone has to," she said. "And you?" He paused. "I usually break them first." For the first time, she saw him grin, not the confident smirk he gave the world, but something almost boyish, almost human. The conversation drifted towards something lighter. He asked about her favorite music. She mentioned her father's old jazz records. "He used to play them every Sunday," she said softly. "I used to think life was supposed to sound like that, steady, warm, a little sad." Dominic replied, "Mine sounded like sirens." They both laughed quietly at how opposite their worlds were. Yet, standing there in the stormlit corridor, they realized silence between them no longer felt awkward, it felt safe. The next day, Dominic sent Rosa home early and found Imani in the library cataloging books. "I have something for you," he said. She frowned. "If it's another car or gift, it's not." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a business card from a private clinic. "They'll take your mother's case. Full care. No cost." She froze. "I didn't ask you for this." "You didn't have to," he said. You work yourself to the bone. Let me help. She exhaled sharply. Help comes with strings. Not this time. There's always a this time, she said, voice tight. You don't understand, every time someone helped me, they owned me. He softened. Then I'll be the exception. There's no such thing. She set the envelope back on the table and walked out, leaving him staring after her, feeling foolish for thinking generosity could buy forgiveness. That night, he couldn't focus on anything. The empire that once demanded his full attention suddenly felt hollow. Every call, every deal, none of it silenced the echo of her refusal. When Marco entered with a new report, Dominic waved him away. Handle it yourself. Marco hesitated. You're losing grip, boss. Maybe I'm letting go, Dominic said quietly. Meanwhile, Imani sat in her apartment, staring at the envelope she'd secretly taken back after all. Pride battled practicality. Her mother's medicine was running out. The clinic could save her life. She hated that accepting it would tie her to him. At last, she whispered, maybe just this once. The next morning, Dominic received a call from the clinic confirming a new patient under his authorization. He didn't tell anyone, just murmured, good. Later that day, when Imani entered the mansion, she paused near his office. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? He asked. You know for what. Then don't thank me, he said. Just take care of her. The simplicity of his tone caught her off guard. There was no pride in it, just sincerity. For the first time, she saw the man behind the power. As weeks passed, their unspoken understanding deepened. He respected her boundaries, she acknowledged his efforts. Yet the attraction they tried to suppress grew in the spaces between words. One evening, after a long meeting, Dominic found her in the garden cutting dead roses. They were dying anyway, she said. Sometimes you have to remove what looks beautiful before it spreads decay. He studied her face and said, you talk like someone who knows what rot looks like up close. Maybe I do, she said. Maybe we both do. The air between them tightened, full of truths neither wanted to name. That same night, Marco confronted Dominic again. She's making you vulnerable. Victor knows. He's watching her. You think protecting her is kindness? It's a weapon against you. Dominic's jaw clenched. Then I'll be the one holding it. You can't protect her from everyone, Marco warned. I can try, Dominic said. The argument ended there, but the words lingered. Later, when Dominic saw Imani leaving through the side gate, he followed at a distance, ensuring she made it to the bus stop safely. He stayed in the car until she boarded, unseen, before driving off. She never knew. The quiet protection continued, groceries appearing at her door, bills mysteriously paid. She told herself it didn't matter who was behind it, but part of her knew. And the knowledge frightened her more than it comforted her. One evening, she confronted him. You need to stop, she said. Stop what? Whatever this is. The money, the favors, the pretending. Pretending? He repeated. Pretending this is just about kindness. You don't help people for free, Dominic. He met her eyes. You're right. I don't. I help people who matter. She shook her head. You barely know me. Then let me, he said softly. The vulnerability in his voice disarmed her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, knowing me won't save you. He replied, maybe it's not about saving anymore. That conversation marked a shift neither could undo. He stopped hiding his interest. She stopped pretending indifference. Yet, they both kept their distance, like two people standing on opposite sides of a glass wall, touching without breaking it. The balance between power and restraint became their language. But danger was closing in. Victor Cruz, sensing Dominic's distraction, began testing borders of his operations. One night, a warehouse under Dominic's control was set on fire. Marco brought the report, angry. He's moving while you're distracted. We need to hit back. Dominic stared out the window. Not yet. Not yet? Marco barked. You've never waited before. Because before, I had nothing to lose, Dominic said. The following evening, Imani noticed guards doubled outside the mansion. Something wrong? She asked Rosa. Trouble with the business, Rosa whispered. Don't ask questions. But Imani's instincts wouldn't let her rest. Later, she saw Dominic on the phone, tension visible even from across the room. When he hung up, she said softly, whatever's coming, you should end it before it ends you. He looked at her and said, some wars you can't end, you can only survive. Then don't let me be part of the collateral, she replied. The plea in her tone made him pause. You're not collateral, he said. You're the reason I'm still fighting. That night, as thunder rumbled over Miami again, he stood alone in the hallway outside her quarters, wanting to knock, stopping himself twice. When he finally turned away, she opened the door quietly and watched him leave. She whispered into the dark, don't make me care about you. The next morning, news reached him that Victor's men were circling close again. Dominic ordered extra protection for all staff, still keeping Imani in the dark. But he knew this fragile equilibrium couldn't last. Feelings had turned to risk, and risk had turned to weakness in a world that punished both. The act ends with Imani leaving the mansion that evening, her reflection flickering in the rain-soaked pavement as Dominic watches from an upstairs window. His voice, low and unreadable, breaks the silence within him. What have you done to me, Imani Cole? Below, she hesitates at the gate as if she felt it too, an invisible thread pulling between them, fragile yet unbreakable. Neither moves. Neither speaks. Only the rain answers, steady and uncertain, as if the city itself were holding its breath for what would come next. The truth doesn't knock, it crashes through when you least expect it. For Imani, that moment came on a quiet night when routine betrayed her. She had stayed late again, the rest of the staff long gone, the mansion wrapped in that uneasy silence that only power can afford. Dominic was in one of his endless meetings, voices, footsteps, laughter that didn't sound friendly. She tried to ignore it, focusing on polishing the desk in his study, folding his papers the same way she did every night. But tonight the air felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. A door slammed somewhere down the hall, followed by a sound she recognized instantly, the cold, unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Her first instinct wasn't fear. It was training. Old habits die hard. She moved quietly to the corner, listening. A voice she didn't know spoke sharply, he's late with the shipment. We can't keep covering for him. Another answered, colder, he'll deliver. Or we'll deliver him. Then she heard Dominic's voice, low, calm, commanding. You're standing in my house. Watch your tone before I decide you don't leave it. The man laughed, a cruel sound. You forget who you owe. Then a crash, a scuffle, and something heavy hit the floor. Imani's heart pounded. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward, and the door swung open. Two men stood there, one holding a gun, the other bleeding from the mouth. Dominic turned, eyes locking on her like a reflex. Get out, he said, voice flat. She froze. I was just, now, Imani. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse, fear for her. She backed away, but the damage was done. The image of that gun, the blood, the men, none of it would leave her. When she got home that night, she didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there, calm in chaos, like violence was his native language. The next morning, she came to work out of duty, not loyalty. Dominic was waiting in the foyer. You shouldn't have been there, he said quietly. Then maybe you shouldn't hold meetings that end in blood. His jaw tightened. You don't understand what you saw. I understand enough, she said. You're exactly what they whisper about. He took a slow breath, stepping closer. And what's that? A man who thinks power can wash away guilt. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his expression, pain, not pride. "You think I wanted this life?" he asked. "No," she said. "I think you chose it every day you stayed in it." She turned to leave, but he said her name once, softly, almost pleading. "Imani." She stopped but didn't turn around. "If you ever cared about the truth, you'd let me tell you mine." That sentence lingered in her mind all day. She tried to focus on her tasks, but everything around her reminded her of what she'd seen, the faint trace of blood on the marble, the smell of gun oil under the cologne. She didn't know whether to feel betrayed or foolish. Later that evening, she packed her bag quietly. Rosa caught her near the gate. "You quitting?" she asked gently. Imani nodded. "It's time." Rosa sighed. "You know, everyone in this place has ghosts. The trick is learning which ones you can live with." "His aren't mine to carry," Imani said. Inside, Dominic watched her through the security feed, jaw clenched. Marco entered the room. "Let her go," Marco said. "She saw too much." Dominic didn't look up. "She saw enough to know who I really am." "That's worse." "Then you know what has to happen," Marco said. Dominic's eyes snapped to him. "If you finish that sentence, I'll finish you." Marco raised his hands. "I'm just saying, distractions get men killed." Dominic poured a drink he didn't touch. "She's not a distraction. She's the only thing that reminds me I'm still human." That night, when she returned to her apartment, she found a letter slipped under her door. No name, just her own written on the envelope. Inside was a single line in Dominic's handwriting, "Come to the pier. Midnight. I owe you the truth." She told herself she wouldn't go. She wasn't like the women who fell for his charm, who mistook danger for depth. But as the clock crept toward midnight, her feet moved before her mind could stop them. The pier was empty except for him. The wind carried salt and regret. Dominic stood there in a black coat, looking less like a kingpin and more like a man unlearning how to breathe. "You came," he said quietly. "You asked," she replied. "So tell me." He looked out over the water. "I didn't build this empire for power. I built it because I was tired of watching good men die poor. My father broke his back for people who never remembered his name. When he died, I promised I'd never be powerless again." "And how many people paid for that promise?" she asked. He turned to her. "Too many. But not all of them were innocent." "And that makes it right?" "No," he said. "It makes it bearable." She watched him carefully. "You kill people. I protect my own." "That's not an answer." He exhaled, long and heavy. "You want honesty?" "I've done things I can't undo. I've also fed families, paid for funerals, kept streets safer than the cops ever did. I'm not a good man, Imani. But I'm not the monster they make me out to be." She crossed her arms. "Then why tell me all this?" "Guilt? Because I wanted you to see the truth before you judged the lie." "You think confession makes you better?" He shook his head. "No. It just means I finally met someone whose opinion matters." The words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to stay angry, to remind herself he was dangerous, but the rawness in his voice chipped away at her defenses. "You really believe you can fix what you've done?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "But maybe I can stop breaking everything I touch." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "This doesn't change what you are." "Maybe not," he replied. "But it changes what I want to be." When she left the pier, the air felt colder. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes following her until she disappeared into the night. Back home, she stood in front of the mirror and whispered, "You can't save him." But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. The next morning, Dominic entered his office to find Marco waiting. "You told her?" Marco asked, incredulous. "Everything she needs to know," Dominic said. "You're losing it, Dom." You don't confess to the help. Dominic looked at him calmly. She's more than that. Marco scoffed. To you maybe. To everyone else, she's leverage. Then they'll learn what happens when they touch leverage, Dominic said coldly. Marco hesitated, seeing something new in Dominic's eyes, resolve, not weakness. You'd burn everything for her, Marco said. If it meant keeping my soul, yes. Marco shook his head. Souls don't last in this business. Then maybe it's time I leave the business, Dominic replied. Meanwhile, Imani took a day off, unable to face the mansion. She visited her mother at the clinic Dominic had arranged. Her mother's color had improved. The nurses were kind. You did this, baby, her mother said weakly. You found help. Imani smiled faintly, hiding the truth. Yeah, Mama. I found help. But inside she wrestled with the cost of that help. Could she really hate a man who'd given her mother a chance to live? By evening, she made her decision. She went back to the mansion, intending to quit properly. When she entered the study, Dominic looked up from his desk. I didn't expect to see you again, he said. I didn't come to stay, she replied. I came to end this right. You're leaving? You knew I would. And yet you came back, he said softly. That means something. It means closure, she said. Nothing more. He stood, walking around the desk slowly. You can tell yourself that if it helps. She stared at him. Don't turn this into something it's not. Then tell me what it is. A mistake, she whispered. One I won't repeat. He stopped in front of her, close enough for her to see the exhaustion in his eyes. If you walk away now, everything goes back to what it was. You go back to struggling, pretending you don't care. I go back to pretending I can live without you. Is that what you want? She looked down. What I want doesn't matter. What's right does. He nodded slowly. Then at least let me say this, I built my life on control. You're the only thing I can't control, and for once, I'm grateful. She swallowed hard. Don't make this harder. It already is, he said. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused, voice trembling. I don't hate you, Dominic. I just can't be part of your world. Then I'll find a new one, he said. One where you belong. She walked away without answering, but the tears she refused to shed burned hot behind her eyes. The next morning, the mansion felt hollow. Dominic moved through his routines, but every room echoed with her absence. Even Marco noticed. You're quiet, he said. She's gone, Dominic replied. Good, Marco muttered. Now we can focus. Dominic looked at him sharply. Focus on what? Revenge? Money? What's the point of building anything if the only thing it buys is loneliness? Marco sighed. You sound like a man ready to retire. Maybe I am, Dominic said. Outside, the city hummed unaware, but in the shadows, Victor Cruz was already plotting. News of Dominic's distraction had reached him, and he was ready to strike. He told his men, when a man like Vance starts caring, that's when you kill him. Hit him where it hurts. As night fell, Dominic stood on his balcony, staring at the skyline that once felt like his kingdom. He thought of Imani, her strength, her silence, the way she saw through the mask. Somewhere out there, she was rebuilding her life without him, and he didn't blame her. But a part of him, the part that still believed in second chances, whispered that this wasn't the end. The wind carried faint sounds from the city, the hum of cars, the echo of sirens, life moving forward. He raised his glass but didn't drink. For the first time, he realized the empire he'd built was nothing compared to the peace he felt in her presence. And now that peace was gone. Down the street, a black SUV idled too long. The driver spoke into a phone, he's alone. No guards tonight. The reply was short, wait for the signal. Dominic turned away from the balcony, unaware that the next chapter of his life had already begun to unravel. Somewhere across the city, Imani felt uneasy, as if her instincts were warning her of something unseen. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then set it down. The distance between them had never felt wider, or more dangerous. And as the night deepened, both of them, one drowning in regret, the other fighting not to care, stood at the edge of a storm they couldn't see coming. Before we continue this story of power, love, and redemption, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you made it to this point, type I am still here. Let's see who's still watching, because what happens next changes everything. The weeks that followed unfolded like a punishment neither of them had earned. Imani stopped showing up at the mansion, her name vanished from the schedule, her number from Dominic's phone. She had told herself leaving was the only way to survive, but each morning when she woke to silence, the air felt wrong, like she'd cut off a part of herself that still kept breathing. For Dominic, the absence carved deeper. The mansion, once filled with footsteps, now echoed with ghosts. He walked through its halls like a man half remembering who he used to be, his hand brushing the edges of furniture she once cleaned, his mind haunted by her voice telling him to stop saving her. He didn't reach out, not yet. He'd spent years commanding armies and killing rivals, but this kind of war was different. It demanded patience. He told himself that if she wanted peace, he'd give it. What he didn't know was that peace would never survive the storm waiting ahead. Imani tried to move on. She picked up part-time cleaning jobs in smaller homes, avoided the news, and tried not to think about the man whose world was built on danger. But no matter how hard she worked, fragments of him followed her, his quiet tone when he said her name, the sincerity in his eyes when he told her he wasn't proud of what he'd become. One afternoon, as she left the clinic after visiting her mother, a black car slowed beside her. The windows were tinted, the engine too quiet. For a moment, she thought it might be one of Dominic's men, checking in from afar. She was wrong. The door cracked open, and before she could react, a man stepped out, his hand brushing her shoulder just long enough to make her freeze. "You should tell your boyfriend to mind his business," he said. His smile was small and cruel. "Or next time, we'll make sure the message hits home." Then the car sped off, leaving her on the curb, heart pounding. That night, Dominic received a call from Marco. "We had eyes on Cruz's people. They made contact with her." Silence followed, thick and dangerous. Dominic's voice was quiet. "She's hurt?" "Shaken. Not touched." "Fix it." "Already handled," Marco said. "But Dom, if Cruz knows about her, it's only a matter of time before he uses her." Dominic hung up without another word. For the rest of the night, he couldn't sit still. The idea of her in danger lit something raw inside him. He'd sworn to keep her out of his world, but his world had found her anyway. By dawn, he was in his car, heading toward her apartment. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, her first reaction wasn't anger, it was confusion. "You can't just show up here," she said. "You're being watched," he replied. "By who?" "By people who'd use you to hurt me." She folded her arms, steady but wary. "Then maybe you shouldn't have anything to do with me." "It's too late for that," he said. His tone wasn't possessive, it was resigned. "They already know you matter." Her face tightened. "That's not my fault. I never said it was." "Then why do I feel like I'm paying for your sins?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped inside and closed the door gently behind him. "Because in my world, everyone close to me does." For a long moment, they stood in the small living room, the distance between them carrying more weight than any argument. Finally, she sighed. "What do you want, Dominic?" "To make sure you're safe." "And then what? Go back to pretending you don't ruin everything you touch?" He looked at her sharply. "You think I like this? You think I want to wake up every day knowing every kindness I give could get someone killed? Then stop living like this," she said. "Walk away." "You don't walk away from people like Cruz," he said quietly. "You bury them." She closed her eyes for a second, shaking her head. You really think that's survival? That's prison with nicer furniture. He took a step closer. Then tell me what freedom looks like, Imani, because I've never seen it. Freedom is knowing you can sleep at night, she said softly. You ever done that? He hesitated. Not in years. She exhaled, realizing that under all the anger and arrogance was a man who'd forgotten how to rest. I can't keep getting pulled into your chaos, she said. I've been through enough. You think I don't know that? He replied. I've read every file they wrote about you. I know what that man did to you. Her voice broke slightly. Then you know why I can't trust anyone again. Then don't, he said. Don't trust me. Just let me protect you. She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, that's the same thing that got me hurt the first time. They didn't speak for a while. The clock ticked, her mother coughed softly in the next room, and the rain outside began again like a bad memory. Dominic said finally, let me post a guard outside. No one will bother you again. I don't want your men near my home. You don't have a choice. That's exactly why I can't do this, she said, voice rising. You don't ask, you decide. You take over people's lives and call it care. His eyes softened. Maybe that's the only way I know how to care. Her anger faltered then, replaced by something more complicated, pity, maybe even understanding. You need to go, she said quietly. He nodded, but before leaving, he looked back once. If they come for you again, I won't stop until I end it. The words weren't a threat, they were a promise. Days later, her fears came true. It was late evening when she left the clinic again, the same route, the same quiet street. The car appeared once more, but this time there was no warning. A hand grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the alley. Before she could scream, headlights flashed, Dominic's car, brakes screeching, doors flying open. His men swarmed, shouts mixing with the sound of fists and gunmetal. She barely registered the chaos before Dominic was beside her, grabbing her shoulders. Are you hurt? She shook her head, breathless. No, he turned to Marco. Find out who sent them. Marco nodded, dragging one of the attackers away. Dominic pulled off his jacket and draped it over her. You shouldn't have been alone. I told you I didn't want your protection, she said weakly. And I told you I don't take orders from people I care about, he replied. The words hung there, raw and unguarded. Later, in the quiet of his mansion, she sat on the couch while he cleaned a scrape on her arm. The intimacy of it was unnerving. You don't have to do this, she said softly. You should be resting. I don't rest, he said. Not when it's my fault. You didn't do this. They came because of me, he said. That's enough. She studied him for a long moment, his focus, the gentleness of his hands. You ever think about leaving all this behind? She asked. Every day. Then why don't you? Because the second I leave, men like Cruz take over. And then there's no one to keep worse men from winning. You sound like a man trying to justify a war he started. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Maybe I am. The silence between them grew heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people have finally stopped pretending. You didn't have to save me, she said quietly. I wasn't saving you, he replied. I was saving myself. From what? From losing the only person who ever made me want to be better. Her breath caught at the sincerity in his tone. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, he reached out, brushing a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You're shaking, he said softly. I'm fine. You don't look fine. And you don't look like a man who kills people, she whispered. But here we are. Something broke open in that moment. It wasn't lust, it was exhaustion, grief, recognition. She leaned forward, and he didn't stop her. Their foreheads touched, both trembling slightly. I don't know what this is, she said. Then let it be what it is, he whispered. No promises. No lies. Their lips met, tentative at first, then certain. It wasn't a kiss born of desire, it was survival, two damaged souls finding air in each other. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "This doesn't make it right." "It doesn't have to," he said. "It just has to be real." For the rest of the night, they didn't speak much. He sat beside her as she rested, the sound of her breathing steadier than his. In the dim light, he looked less like a crime lord and more like a man finally beginning to feel the cost of his own power. When dawn came, he walked her to the door. "It's not safe out there yet," he said. "Nothing's ever safe," she replied. "But I'll take my chances." "With or without me?" "That depends on whether you keep trying to control what you can't own." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll settle for standing close." She looked at him, almost smiling back. "Close isn't always safe either." "Neither is breathing," he said. "But we still do it." That morning marked the beginning of something neither of them could name. They saw each other differently now, no longer boss and maid, but two people walking the fine line between destruction and redemption. Yet in the background, the danger grew louder. Victor Cruz wasn't done. He'd lost men, lost face, and now he wanted blood. Marco warned Dominic, "He's going to hit back soon." Dominic's response was cold. "Then he'll find out what losing really feels like." But even as he said it, a small part of him knew that no amount of revenge would matter if she got caught in the crossfire again. For Imani, life returned to its fragile rhythm, but her thoughts betrayed her. She'd lie awake at night, remembering his touch, his words, the broken honesty in his voice. She hated herself for caring, yet the truth was undeniable, she had fallen for the one man she should have feared. And that realization terrified her more than any danger outside. One evening, she found herself back at the mansion without thinking. She stood outside, staring at the front door, unsure whether to knock. Before she could decide, it opened. Dominic stood there, as if he'd been waiting. "I didn't call," she said. "You didn't have to. I just wanted to make sure you were alive," he finished. "Yeah," she said softly. "Alive." He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. The conversation that followed was quieter, gentler than before. "You ever think we met at the wrong time?" she asked. "Maybe the wrong life," he said. "If things were different, they're not," she interrupted. "And they never will be." "Then let me have this," he said. "Just tonight." "Just you." She hesitated, then nodded. "Just tonight." And as the night deepened, so did something between them, something fragile and dangerous all at once. They had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, yet for the first time in years, neither of them cared. Because for one brief moment, between fear and forgiveness, love had found them, quiet, imperfect, and impossibly real. Outside, unseen, a car idled at the end of the street. Victor Cruz's man lifted a camera, snapping photos through the mansion window, capturing the one truth that would soon destroy everything they had just begun to build. Love has a cruel way of testing its own truth, not through distance or silence, but through betrayal that cuts deeper than a blade. For weeks, the world seemed calm for Dominic and Imani, too calm for the kind of life they lived. She had started to return to the mansion more often, not as an employee, but as something undefined, part guest, part confidant, part temptation he didn't know how to resist. The nights had grown quieter, the chaos more manageable. For the first time in years, Dominic believed he might have found something worth stepping away from his empire for. But peace, in his world, was never a promise. It was bait. And someone was already pulling the line. Sienna Morelli had always been beautiful in the way that made men forget their better judgment. Once Dominic's lover and partner in the business, she now found herself replaced, not by another queen of the underworld, but by a woman who dusted floors and spoke truth without fear. It wasn't jealousy that burned her. It was humiliation. She had given Dominic her loyalty, her body, her silence. And now he had given his heart to someone who didn't want his money or his power. To Sienna, that wasn't romance. That was insult. She made her move through Victor Cruz, Dominic's most dangerous rival, a man who knew Sienna's value wasn't in her beauty but in her access. Together, they crafted the perfect plan, a hit that would not only destroy Dominic's freedom but his reputation. Sienna had contacts within law enforcement, Victor had reach inside the streets. All they needed was the right crime, the right witness, and the right lie. It began on a Thursday night. Dominic was meeting with his men about a potential truce between territories. Imani had stopped by to drop off medical supplies for Rosa, who'd been feeling unwell. The air was warm, still. Dominic looked up when she entered, his expression softening in a way his men couldn't ignore. "You shouldn't be here tonight," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "I thought peace meetings were safe." "Not in this city," he said. "Not with people like me." She started to answer, but his phone buzzed, one message that would turn his life upside down. The text came from a number he no longer trusted but could never ignore. "The feds are coming. Tonight." Frame in motion. He didn't understand it at first, thought it was a bluff. But 20 minutes later, the sound of sirens sliced through the night. His men panicked, scattering, burning documents, hiding weapons. Dominic turned to Imani. "Go home. Now." "Dominic, what's happening?" "You need to leave. They're coming for me." "For what?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I can't have you here when they arrive." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you like this." "You don't have a choice," he said, grabbing her shoulders. "Please." It was the first time she'd ever heard him beg. She turned toward the door, but before she could move, the mansion erupted with lights. Dozens of officers stormed the property, shouting commands, guns drawn. Dominic raised his hands as they surrounded him. "Dominic Vance, you're under arrest for the murder of federal informant Daniel Russo." The room spun for Imani. She stepped forward instinctively, but an officer pushed her back. "Ma'am, stay where you are." "He didn't do anything," she said. "Ma'am, step aside." Dominic looked at her once, his face unreadable. "It's okay," he said. "Don't say a word. Don't get involved." But the look in his eyes told her everything: fear, disbelief, and something like apology. As they dragged him away, she shouted after him, "Dominic." But the sound of the helicopters drowned her out. By the time she reached the front gate, the convoy was gone. The headlines broke before dawn. Miami crime boss charged in execution of federal informant. Photos of Dominic in handcuffs plastered every major network. They painted him as the mastermind behind a federal hit, a man finally caught after years of evading justice. The evidence, they said, was irrefutable: wire transfers, shell companies, a witness placing him at the scene. Imani watched it all unfold on her television, her hands shaking. She knew that look on his face when he'd been taken. That wasn't guilt. That was betrayal. But by who? At the detention center, Dominic sat across from his attorney, a man more interested in his paycheck than his client's innocence. "You're facing capital charges," the lawyer said coldly. "The feds are pushing for the death penalty." Dominic's tone stayed calm. "They don't have a case. They have a witness. A credible one." "Who?" "Sienna Morelli." For a moment, Dominic didn't move. Then he leaned back slowly, a bitter laugh escaping. "Of course." The lawyer frowned. "You don't look surprised." "I'm not," he said. "Just disappointed." The lawyer gathered his papers. "She claims you ordered the hit to silence Russo before he could testify. Her statement's airtight." "And the money?" Dominic asked. "What money?" "The transfers. The offshore accounts they'll use as proof." The lawyer hesitated. "They've already traced them. They lead back to one of your shell companies." "Then she did it right," Dominic murmured. Meanwhile, Imani tried to visit him, but every attempt was blocked. Only family or counsel, the guard said. He has no family, she replied. Then you're not on the list. Days passed. Rumors spread. The news networks called her the Maid mistress, claiming she'd been his alibi. Reporters camped outside her apartment. She shut off her phone, cut off contact with everyone except her mother. But when a friend from her days on the force called, the truth started to surface. Imani, your boy's getting set up. Sienna's been funneling money through an account tied to Victor Cruz for months. Someone in the prosecutor's office is dirty, but no one's talking. Can you prove it? She asked. Not without someone on the inside. You used to be one of us, remember? Maybe it's time to use those instincts again. That night, she sat alone at her kitchen table, papers spread out, old notes from her detective days, phone numbers, security contacts. The woman who once swore she'd never go back to that world felt the old spark come alive again. The same fire that made her badge mean something before it was taken from her. She whispered to herself, "You're not taking him down for something he didn't do." In his cell, Dominic spent his nights staring at the ceiling, the sound of metal doors clanging like echoes of his choices. He thought of Imani, her voice, her steady gaze, and wondered if she believed he was guilty. Marco had tried to visit, but Dominic refused. "They'll twist anything you say," he warned. "Stay out of this." Marco ignored the order and began digging into Cruz's movements anyway. The deeper he looked, the clearer it became, the frame-up was personal. Sienna had used Dominic's love for Imani as the perfect distraction. The night of the murder, she had arranged a fake meeting between Cruz and one of Dominic's associates while transferring money under Dominic's name. When the informant turned up dead hours later, the trail led straight back to him. It was flawless. It was cruel. Weeks turned into months. Dominic's trial approached. The prosecution painted him as a cold strategist, using charm and wealth to cover blood. The evidence was overwhelming. But through it all, one person refused to give up, Imani. She began contacting her old police sources quietly, trading favors, pulling surveillance logs, rechecking timelines. Every lead brought her closer to the same name, Sienna. One evening, after hours of searching, she finally found what she needed, a recording buried in an evidence archive. It was security footage from the hotel where the informant was found. The timestamp placed Sienna there minutes before the shooting. She froze, heart racing. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." But evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed exposure, leverage, and time, all of which she didn't have. Dominic's execution date had already been set. The clock was running out. Still, she pressed on. She met with a journalist she trusted, sliding the USB across the table. "You want a story," she said. "This one will set fire to every lie they built." In prison, Dominic sat through his sentencing hearing like a man already halfway gone. He'd accepted his fate, not out of guilt, but exhaustion. When the judge announced the death penalty, he didn't flinch. But later, alone in his cell, he whispered her name under his breath. Imani. It wasn't a plea. It was faith. Back in the city, Imani was running on adrenaline and fear. She'd received threats, anonymous calls warning her to stop. One message came with a photo of her mother. That was the line. She called Marco. "I need your help," she said. "I have proof Sienna and Cruz framed him." "Then we move now," Marco said. "Send it to me." "No," she said. "If this leaks before the right people see it, they'll bury it, and me with it." "Then what's your plan?" "I'm going to the prison myself. He deserves to hear it from me." The next morning, she drove 3 hours in silence. Every mile felt heavier than the last. When she arrived, the guard recognized her name from the media frenzy. "You here for Dominic Vance?" "Yes." "You get 15 minutes. "I only need 10, she said. Inside, Dominic sat at the metal table, his wrists cuffed, his expression unreadable. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes, relief, disbelief, hope. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Neither should you," she replied. "I have something." She slid a folder across the table. "Surveillance footage, financial records, witness reports. Sienna's fingerprints are all over it." He stared at her. "You did this?" "We did this," she said. "You taught me to stop running." His voice broke slightly. "Imani, if this is what I think it is, it's enough to get you out," she said. "But we need time." He looked at her like he was seeing sunlight for the first time. "You shouldn't have risked this. I couldn't let them kill the only man who ever told me the truth." The guard banged on the glass. "Time's up." Dominic didn't move. "Imani." "What?" "Whatever happens next, don't look back." She smiled faintly. "Neither should you." As she walked out, the sound of the cell door closing behind her felt final. But deep down, both knew it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war that would decide not just their freedom, but their souls. And somewhere in another part of the city, Sienna watched the news report showing Imani leaving the prison. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So she thinks she can save him," she whispered to herself. "Then she better be ready to burn with him." The pieces were moving. The truth was out there. And before it was over, every secret buried in Dominic Vance's empire would come crashing into the light. War doesn't always begin with bullets. Sometimes, it starts with a woman refusing to let the man she loves die for a crime he didn't commit. For Imani, sleep became a stranger after Dominic's sentencing. Every sound of the city felt like a countdown. Every tick of the clock reminded her he was one day closer to the chair. She had spent nights replaying his face in that courtroom, how calm he looked even when the judge read the words that sealed his fate. But she knew that calm wasn't peace. It was surrender. And she couldn't live knowing she'd watched him give up without trying to fight. She began her war quietly. She pulled the box from under her bed, the one she'd buried after losing her badge. Inside were fragments of a life she'd sworn never to touch again, old police IDs, a flash drive of archived case files, burner phones, passwords she once used to trace informants. She stared at them for a long time before whispering, "One more case." The case that mattered most. She reached out to an old friend, Detective Harper, who owed her more than one favor. "I need access to sealed financial logs," she said. He hesitated. "Imani, you're not even supposed to be in the system anymore." "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I'm asking for a login." The silence on the other end was long, but when he finally spoke, his voice softened. "You always were a damn storm when you wanted something." "Then you know it's already too late to stop me," she replied. Harper sent the credentials. That night, her apartment turned into a war room, screens glowing, papers spread across every surface, the smell of cold coffee and desperation filling the air. She traced wire transfers, accounts linked to Victor Cruz's shell companies, and there it was, one transaction labeled consulting funneled through Sienna Morelli's offshore bank 2 weeks before the murder. It wasn't proof yet, but it was blood on digital paper. She whispered to herself, "You got sloppy, Sienna." Meanwhile, inside death row, Dominic sat alone, his eyes fixed on a wall where a small crack ran from ceiling to floor. It had become his clock. Each day, the light shifted along that line until darkness took over again. He'd stopped counting time by days and started measuring it in breaths. When Marco finally got clearance to visit, Dominic almost didn't go. "What's the point?" he muttered to himself. But when he saw Marco's face across the glass, some spark of the man he used to be came back. Marco leaned in, voice low. "She's fighting for you, Dom." "Who?" "Imani." "She shouldn't," Dominic said. "She's already done enough. You know she won't stop." Dominic looked down. "Then she'll end up like the rest of them." "Maybe," Marco said. "Or maybe she's the only one who makes it out clean." Outside, Imani was living on adrenaline. She met Harper in a parking lot behind a diner at midnight, exchanging files like criminals. You didn't get this from me, he warned. If Internal Affairs finds out, they won't, she said. I've been invisible for years. I can do it a little longer. He looked at her carefully. You love him? Enough to remember what justice feels like, she replied. Her next stop was a retired forensic accountant who had once testified in a major RICO case. She paid him in cash to analyze the transfers. You're saying these payments were structured to look legitimate, she asked. The man nodded. Yeah, someone went to great lengths to make it stick. Whoever did this knew the system inside out. Sienna, she whispered. She used to handle his finances. The man frowned. Then you're chasing a ghost. People like her cover their tracks with firewalls and lawyers. Imani smiled faintly. Then I'll burn through both. Her breakthrough came 2 weeks later. While cross-referencing surveillance footage from the hotel where the informant was found, she noticed a familiar figure in the background, Sienna, wearing sunglasses and a trench coat, walking out just 12 minutes before the time of death. The timestamp didn't lie. Imani leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. You were there. She paused the frame, zooming in until the image was clear enough to recognize the bracelet Sienna always wore. Got you. But getting the truth was only the first step. Getting it heard would take fire. She reached out to a journalist she trusted, Miguel Ramirez, a local reporter known for exposing corruption in Miami's justice system. I have a story that will make your career, she said over the phone. He chuckled. That line usually means I'm about to get shot at. Not if we move fast, she said. They met the next morning in his office. When she handed him the files, his smile faded. This is real? Every line, every timestamp, she said. If you publish it, it'll blow up every deal between Cruz, Sienna, and half the city's prosecutors. And if I don't? Then an innocent man dies, and you'll be writing about the next scandal while he's 6 feet under. Miguel exhaled slowly. You sound like a cop again. Maybe I am, she said quietly. When the story hit the press, the city caught fire. Leaked evidence suggests Miami businesswoman tied to federal informant's murder. Sienna Morelli under investigation for conspiracy. The governor's office called for a review. The defense team filed an emergency appeal. And for the first time in months, Dominic's cell door opened with purpose. The guard said, You've got a visitor. Says she's your last. He stood slowly, unsure what that meant. But when he entered the visitation room and saw her sitting there, a folder in front of her, something inside him broke open. She looked at him with eyes that carried both exhaustion and defiance. I told you I wouldn't stop, she said. He sat across from her, voice low. You shouldn't have risked this. You taught me something, she said. That survival isn't living. I'm not surviving anymore. She pushed the folder across the table. Everything's here, financial records, footage, sworn statements. Sienna was in that hotel before the murder. The money trail connects her to Victor Cruz and the prosecutor's office. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Does it matter? She interrupted. What matters is you're walking out of here. He stared at the documents, his jaw tightening as realization sank in. She did it, he whispered. She framed me. She wanted you to lose everything, Imani said. But she didn't plan on me finding out. He looked up at her, emotion breaking through the hardened layers. Why, Imani? After everything I've done, why would you fight for me? She took a slow breath. Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. Because when I looked at you, I saw the same wound I've carried for years. And because, she stopped, her voice trembling. Because I couldn't watch you die knowing the truth. The guard stepped forward. Time's up. Dominic ignored him. Imani, he said, his voice low and steady, whatever happens, promise me you'll leave this city. Don't look back. She shook her head. I'll leave when you walk out with me. He smiled faintly, the first real smile she'd seen in months. Then I guess you're stuck here a little longer. Hours later, chaos erupted across the state. Miguel's story spread faster than the authorities could contain it. News networks ran footage of Sienna being escorted out of her penthouse in handcuffs. Victor Cruz's properties were raided. Prosecutors scrambled to protect themselves. And inside the governor's office, phones rang nonstop. By midnight, a statement went public: execution halted pending review of new evidence. In his cell, Dominic heard the announcement through a guard's radio. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he sat down on the edge of his cot, his head in his hands. For years, he'd built walls so high that not even God could climb them. Now, those walls were crumbling because one woman refused to believe the lies written about him. He whispered her name into the silence. Imani. She was waiting outside the prison gates when they brought him out for questioning. The sun hadn't risen yet, but light was already touching the horizon. As the doors opened, their eyes met through the wire fence. He looked different, older, thinner, but alive. She wanted to run to him, to close the distance, but she stayed still, letting the moment breathe. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, a silent gesture of gratitude. She nodded once, her throat tight. That night, the streets of Miami buzzed with shock. People whispered about the maid who freed the Mafia boss, about the woman who challenged the system and won. But for Imani, none of it felt like victory. She sat alone in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, tears falling without sound. She wasn't crying for relief. She was crying for everything it had cost, the innocence lost, the fear she'd lived with, the love that had no place left to hide. In the holding cell before his release hearing, Dominic sat in silence. Marco visited one last time, shaking his head. She really did it. Dominic looked up. You doubted her? No, Marco said. I doubted you deserved her. Dominic smiled faintly. You're not wrong. Marco leaned closer. Cruz is gone. Sienna's done. You could take it all back, Dom. The power, the money, it's yours for the taking. Dominic's eyes hardened. Not this time. The next morning, the world watched as the governor officially vacated his sentence. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Dominic didn't say a word. As he stepped outside those gates, the first breath of free air hit him like redemption and punishment at once. Imani stood waiting, her eyes full of something between disbelief and peace. He walked toward her slowly, as if afraid she'd disappear. When he reached her, he didn't speak, he just took her hand. For a long time, neither said anything. The city moved around them, but in that moment, time held still. The narrator's voice settled softly. He had been caged by his enemies, by his choices, by his own belief that love was weakness. But in the end, it wasn't violence that saved him, it was faith. The kind that refuses to quit, even when the world tells you it's over. And as the sun rose over Miami, the man once called a monster walked free, hand in hand with the woman who proved he wasn't one. Freedom has a strange sound when you haven't heard it in years. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It's quiet, almost hesitant, like it's waiting to see if you're ready to receive it. When Dominic Vance stepped out of those prison gates, he didn't raise his hands in victory or fall to his knees in gratitude. He simply stood still, eyes closed, breathing in the morning air that felt foreign to his lungs. The sun was rising over Miami, and the heat touched his skin like something sacred. Around him, the crowd murmured, reporters, onlookers, men from his past, but all he saw was the horizon. All he wanted to see was her. The warden's voice cut through the noise. Mr. Vance, your people are here to take you home. Dominic opened his eyes slowly. Parked beyond the gate was a black SUV, and beside it stood Marco and two of his men, loyal faces, though worn by the kind of loyalty that had cost them too much. Marco approached first. It's done, he said quietly. Cruz is gone. Sienna's rotting in federal custody. You're a free man. Dominic gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. Free, he repeated, as if testing the word for the first time. Marco looked uneasy. We should talk. There are things to rebuild. Dominic glanced at him. Rebuild? The network's in shambles, Marco said. Territories are wide open. Our contacts are waiting for your orders. Dominic's gaze drifted back toward the open road. There's nothing left to rebuild, Marco. The world I built fell with me. Let it stay buried. Marco frowned. You walk away now, you'll lose everything. I already did, Dominic said softly. He turned away, leaving Marco in silence, and walked through the gates alone. On the other side of the city, Imani stood outside the courthouse, exhaustion written across her face. She'd spent hours answering reporters, testifying before the governor's office, and finalizing Dominic's release paperwork. Her clothes were wrinkled, her voice hoarse, her spirit somewhere between relief and disbelief. When she finally stepped onto the courthouse steps, she looked up at the sky, the same sky that stretched above the prison, and whispered, "It's over." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. Closure was a word people used when they were too tired to fight anymore. She started down the steps, clutching the small folder she'd carried through the whole ordeal. It held copies of the evidence she'd gathered, the same documents that had saved his life. It felt strange now, how something so small could carry the weight of redemption. She was halfway across the parking lot when she heard a voice behind her. You walked too fast for someone who just saved a life. She froze. Her heart stuttered once before she turned around. There he was, Dominic, dressed simply in a dark shirt and jeans, his hair shorter, his face thinner, but his eyes still carrying that same calm she had once hated him for. For a moment, they just looked at each other. No words, no motion. The kind of silence that only comes from two people who've lived through hell together. Finally, Imani broke it. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. You just got out. He smiled faintly. And the first thing I wanted to do was find you. She looked away. You found me. Now what? He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking with every breath. Now I thank you, he said. And I tell you that I don't deserve you. You don't, she said softly. But that never stopped you before. He nodded, accepting it without defense. I meant what I said in there, he continued. That world, the one I built, it's gone. I don't want it back. She studied him carefully, searching his face for truth. You mean to tell me you're just going to walk away? From everything? I already did, he said. In that cell, I buried who I was. And who are you now? She asked. He hesitated. A man who's trying to learn how to live without power. She looked down, her voice quiet but sharp. Power wasn't your problem, Dominic. It was the only thing that made you feel safe. His eyes softened. And you? He asked. What makes you feel safe now? Nothing, she said. Not anymore. They stood in silence for a long time, the air thick with what hadn't been said. Then Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper, an official document stamped by the governor's office. They released my assets this morning, he said. Every cent, every property. It's mine again. But it doesn't mean anything. So what are you going to do with it? She asked. He unfolded the paper and handed it to her. Give it away. She frowned. Give it away? To something that matters. Something that makes all of this mean something. He paused, his voice steady. I want to start a foundation for the wrongfully convicted. People like me. People who don't have someone like you to fight for them. Imani stared at him, unsure if she should believe what she was hearing. You're serious? He nodded. It's the only way I can make peace with what I've done. And what about your men? She asked. The Empire? You think they'll let you walk away that easily? They don't own me anymore, he said. I'm done with power that destroys. I want power that heals. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes wet with something she didn't want him to see. "You sound like someone I don't recognize," she said softly. "Maybe that's the point," he replied. The next few weeks moved in a blur. News outlets ran the story of the ex-Mafia boss turned reformer. Dominic Vance launches the Vance Redemption Project, the headlines read. Some called it redemption. Others called it strategy. But for Imani, it was something else, proof that change was possible, even for men like him. She agreed to help him build it, not out of love or loyalty, but because she couldn't walk away from something that might save lives. They worked side by side, late nights spent drafting mission statements, contacting lawyers, setting up partnerships with advocacy groups. Slowly, what began as an act of penance turned into something real. Still, under the surface, emotion brewed quietly between them. There were moments, small, fleeting, when their hands brushed over files, or when their eyes met across the conference table, and the weight of everything they'd endured pressed between them like gravity. One night, after a long day of meetings, Imani sat on the porch of the rented office space, watching the city lights flicker against the water. Dominic joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "You look tired," he said. "That's funny," she replied. "You look human." He smiled. "I'm trying." She sipped her coffee, her tone softening. "You've done more than try, Dominic. You changed." "No," he said. "You changed me." She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "Don't give me that credit," she said. "I didn't change you. I just showed you who you already were underneath all the noise." He studied her, his voice low. "Then stay. Stay long enough to make sure I don't forget it." She shook her head gently. "You don't need me anymore." "That's where you're wrong," he said. "I need you because I finally know what love is supposed to feel like, quiet, patient, undeserved." For the first time, she didn't argue. She set her coffee down and looked out toward the ocean. "Do you know what scared me most about loving you?" she said. "It wasn't your world. It was mine. I built my life on avoiding pain, avoiding trust. You made me remember what it feels like to risk again." He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "So risk it with me." She smiled sadly. "And if it breaks again?" "Then we rebuild it," he said. The following week, they held a small press event at the new foundation office. No grand speeches, no fanfare, just a quiet gathering of journalists and supporters. Imani stood beside Dominic as he addressed the crowd. "This isn't about clearing my name," he said. "It's about giving back what I took, time, faith, hope. We call this the Vance Redemption Project because redemption isn't a gift. It's a choice you make every day." When the applause ended, he turned to Imani, their eyes meeting with a shared sense of understanding. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either.
Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, Dominic found her standing by the window, watching the sunset. "You didn't say much today," he said. "You said enough for both of us," she replied. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that mansion 2 years ago?" He nodded. "Every day." "And," she asked, "and I think I would have died long before they sentenced me." She turned toward him. "You mean emotionally?" "No," he said. "I mean entirely." There was a pause, heavy but not painful, just real. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched his hand. It wasn't grand or cinematic. It was small, human enough. "You're free now," she said quietly. "So are you," he answered. She smiled faintly. "I think I've been free for a while. I just didn't know what to do with it." "Then let's figure it out together," he said. As the night deepened, they sat on the office steps, watching the city hum below. There were no promises, no declarations, just the sound of 2 people breathing in sync. For the first time, neither needed control, explanations, or guarantees. What they had was fragile but real, built on ashes, pain, and something stronger than both. The narrator's voice softened. In a city where power was everything, 2 people finally chose something else, peace. Not the kind found in silence or safety, but in surrender. For Dominic Vance, power had always been currency. But now, love was the only wealth he wanted to keep. And as dawn stretched across the horizon once more, Dominic turned to Imani and whispered, "You were right. I didn't deserve you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Maybe not. But you became the man who does." That was enough. Morning rises soft over the Florida coast, a gentle hum replacing the chaos that once defined Dominic Vance's world. The ocean outside their home moves slow and patient, like a heartbeat that has finally found its rhythm. Years have passed since the sound of gunfire, since the clang of prison bars, since the storm that nearly swallowed them both. Now there's laughter. It comes from the backyard, where two boys race across the sand, their voices spilling into the salt air, fearless and free. Dominic sits on the deck, a fishing rod in one hand, eyes watching the horizon with a calmness that years ago would have terrified him. Imani stands on the porch, one hand resting on the small curve of her belly. She's pregnant again, glowing in a way that isn't showy but real, the quiet glow of a woman who's fought through darkness and earned her peace. The narrator begins softly. For men who built kingdoms on violence, redemption rarely came wrapped in serenity. But sometimes, if the heart lived long enough to regret, peace would find its way home. Dominic looks over his shoulder at her and smiles faintly. "They're going to tangle the lines again," he says. Imani laughs, a deep, genuine sound that had once been buried under grief. "Let them. They'll figure it out. They always do." He nods, pulling the line in slowly, glancing down as the morning light hits his wedding ring. He never used to wear jewelry, said it made him feel chained. Now that band of gold is the only thing he never takes off. Imani walks down to him, her bare feet leaving prints in the sand. "You still get quiet when you think," she says, sitting beside him. "Old habits," he replies. "I used to go silent when I was planning something. Now I go quiet because there's nothing left to plan." She smiles softly. "That's a good kind of silence." "Yeah," he murmurs, "it is." The wind picks up slightly, carrying the sound of the boys laughing as they chase after a crab near the water. Dominic watches them, eyes soft. "They don't know who I used to be," he says quietly. "To them, I'm just Dad." Imani looks at him, her tone even. "That's all they need to know." "Do you ever think I should tell them?" he asks. She shakes her head. No child deserves to inherit their parents' ghosts. He lets out a breath. "Sometimes I forget how much you've seen. You talk like someone who's lived 100 lives." "Maybe I have," she says. "But I only want this one now." The foundation, the Vance Redemption Project, has grown far beyond what either of them imagined. A small nonprofit born from guilt became a movement. The house hums with life, but inside their office by the window, the framed photo of the first man they helped free sits next to a plaque that reads, "Every life deserves a second chance." The narrator continues, "What began as penance became purpose." The same man who once controlled cities now spent his days freeing strangers he'd never meet. The empire he destroyed made way for something greater, a legacy of mercy. Later that afternoon, Imani sits at her desk reviewing a case file, a young man wrongfully convicted on false testimony. She reads through the details slowly, the weight of it pressing against her chest. Dominic walks in, towel around his neck, fresh from playing with the boys. "Still working?" he asks. "This one's different," she replies. "He reminds me of you." He steps closer, resting his hands on the back of her chair. "Then we'll get him home," he says simply. She smiles up at him. "You say that like it's easy." "No," he replies, "I say that because it's right." The days pass gently, marked not by fear but by small routines, breakfast at sunrise, paperwork before noon, family dinners where laughter echoes louder than the waves outside. The old Dominic would have called it boredom. The man he became calls it heaven. But peace, as he's learned, doesn't erase the past. It teaches you to live with it. Some nights he still wakes in sweat, the echo of prison metal in his ears. When that happens, Imani's hand finds his, grounding him back into the present. "You're home," she whispers. And every time, he believes her a little more. One evening, while the children sleep, Dominic sits by the water alone, the sky washed in orange and violet. The narrator's voice softens. Redemption doesn't erase memory. It asks you to walk beside it, every day, until the weight no longer crushes you. Imani joins him quietly, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You think too much," she says. "I think about how close I came to never having this," he replies. "You should stop looking backward." "Maybe," he says. "But sometimes the past is the only thing that reminds me what the present costs." She sits beside him, leaning into his shoulder. "Then remember this," she says. "The cost was worth it. The foundation's impact grows." News anchors talk about it, politicians reference it, and former inmates send letters of gratitude. One of the freed men visits the house one afternoon. His name is Aaron, mid-40s, a father of two who spent 12 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. He shakes Dominic's hand, eyes full of quiet respect. "You didn't just change my life," he says. "You gave me back my kids." Dominic nods, visibly moved. "Then promise me you'll live in a way that honors the years you lost." "I already am," Aaron says, voice breaking. After he leaves, Imani stands in the doorway, watching Dominic's face. "You do realize you've become the man you used to hate?" she says. "What do you mean?" he asks. "The kind who changes lives without asking for anything back." He smiles faintly. "Then maybe hate was just envy." That night, the couple sits in the living room, the fireplace crackling, the boys asleep upstairs. Dominic looks at Imani across the soft glow of the room. "I think about it sometimes," he says quietly. "How you walked into that prison the day I was supposed to die. You didn't have to. You could have let me go." Imani's eyes glisten, but her voice stays steady. "I didn't do it for you," she says. "I did it because I couldn't watch another good man pay for someone else's evil." He nods slowly. "But you did save me, not just my life, but whatever part of me was still human." "You were always human," she replies. "You just didn't believe it yet." Outside, the wind howls softly against the windows, a reminder that storms still exist even in peace. The narrator reflects. In a world where power once defined him, love became his new measure of strength. And in her, he found not forgiveness, but faith. As the years pass, their love doesn't fade. It deepens, becomes simpler, more patient. When their daughter is born, Dominic holds her in his arms, tears falling freely. "She has your eyes," he whispers. Imani smiles through exhaustion. "Then she'll see the world differently." They name her Grace, not because they planned to, but because it felt right. The narrator observes, "Some names don't just identify us. They define the reason we survived." Years later, an anniversary arrives, the day his execution was halted. Dominic marks it not with celebration, but reflection. He visits the Foundation's Miami office, now bustling with staff and volunteers. A new plaque hangs on the wall. Founded on truth. Sustained by love. He traces the engraved letters with his fingertips. One of the younger staff members approaches him. "Mr. Vance," she says shyly, "you've inspired more people than you know." He smiles gently. "Then make sure you inspire more." At home that evening, Imani finds him staring out the window again. "You okay?" she asks. "Yeah," he replies. "Just thinking how strange it feels to owe your life to someone and still never feel like you've repaid them." She moves closer, cupping his face. "Then stop trying. Just live. That's repayment enough." He kisses her hand. "You always know what to say." "That's because I know you," she replies softly. The narrator closes in tone, slow and introspective. Some stories end with tragedy. Others fade quietly. But a few, the rare ones, become testaments to change. Dominic and Imani's story wasn't about a maid and a mafia boss. It was about two broken people who refused to stay broken. They didn't find love in perfection. They found it in forgiveness. As the sun dips below the horizon, Dominic takes her hand and whispers, "You saved me, not from death, but from the man I used to be." She smiles, eyes full of memory. "No, Dominique. You saved yourself." You just needed someone to believe. He nods slowly, her words echoing through the fading light. Then promise me, he says softly. Promise me when I'm gone, you'll keep believing. Not in me, but in what we built. I already do, she says. The camera of the story pulls back, revealing the ocean beyond, calm and endless. The Foundation's sign gleams near the gate. The Vance Redemption Project. Every life deserves a second chance. Children's laughter echoes faintly. A voice, the narrator, fades in one last time. In a world built on blood and betrayal, love became their cleanest crime. Before the closing fades to black, the narrator continues gently. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe so more untold love stories find their voice. Protect someone you love. Share this video with them. Because sometimes the right story can stop the wrong ending. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you made it this far, type, I'm still here. Let's see who stayed until the very end. Every love story leaves a mark. Every redemption begins with belief. What story should we tell next?